Hello, I'm going to go over why Ben Bernanke, former Fed Reserve Chairman of the private U.S. Central Bank, just clued us in that hyperinflation is coming to the U.S. dollar. Now, recently, American hedge fund manager David Einhorn had dinner with Ben Bernanke, and he relayed that during his conversation with Bernanke, that Bernanke said he is 100% sure that hyperinflation will not happen. Now, the reason why we can always take the opposite to be true is because former Fed Reserve Vice Chairman Alan Greenspan said, quote unquote, the last duty of a central banker is to tell the public the truth. So we always know to believe the opposite of what they say. Now, I'm not saying because he's 100% sure there will be no hyperinflation, we're to interpret that as there's a 100% possibility of hyperinflation. But I think we see that the more vehement the denial, the closer we are to disaster, because we saw the maestro of U.S. dollar destruction, former Fed Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, say in 2005 when confronted with the obvious housing bubble that existed at the time. He said there is no housing bubble, but he did admit to the housing market being frothy. So we saw that 2 years later the housing bubble collapsed because it wasn't in immediate danger of the bubble bursting at that point, so he could deny it, but not in such strong terms. But I think when you see such absolute terms, 100% there will be no hyperinflation, that means we are on the cusp of real danger with the dollar breaking through its multi-year support levels and very, very significant inflation that could evolve into hyperinflation. Because remember, hyperinflation is about loss of confidence in the US dollar, and no one could predict the progression of that happening. So if that happens very quickly, then we could indeed have hyperinflation with the US dollar. Now, before I go on, I also want to give props to David Einhorn for actually being able to have a peaceful dinner with Ben Bernanke, because, you know, if we ask that famous question, what would Jesus do? We know what Jesus would have done because he showed us in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He made a whip out of cords, physically whipped the bankers out of the temple, and overturned their tables in disgust with the misanthropic actions of the bankers. And who's the most misanthropic banker of them all? Ben Bernanke. So David Einhorn just did something that Jesus couldn't have done, which is sit and peacefully eat with a misanthropic person like Ben Bernanke. Now I also wanted to discuss very, very quickly the huge lies that the banking government complex are telling in terms of inflation, in terms of unemployment rates. They're basically using Hitler's propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels' strategy, which is, I'm going to paraphrase here, but he basically said the bigger the lie, the easier it is to convince people of that lie. And to maintain that lie, you basically have to use the power of the state to crush all dissenting truth that is out there. And that's basically what's going on in every country that's led by banker government run complexes. Now, if you look at some of the rates of inflation, like 1.5% is what the U.S. banking government complex is saying is the rolling 12-month rate of inflation, when they're underestimating it by at least a minimum of 500%, because the true inflation is at least 9%, 10%, 11% or higher. And they're also saying unemployment 6.5%. When, you know, if you're familiar with consulting firm interviews, you know, sometimes they ask you to see what your critical thinking processes are. They'll ask you questions where there's no right or wrong answer, but they just want to see what your, again, how you think. So they'll ask you, like, how many kilometers is it from Earth to the Moon? Or how much does a 777 weigh? And you just have to go through the process. Like with a 777, there's 5 seats in the center aisle. There's 3 seats on each window. So that means 11 seats in each row. There's so many rows. Each seat I estimate to weigh this many kilograms, and so forth and so forth and so forth. If that is the setup of a 777, I can't remember off the top of my head. So, anyways, if you gave an answer that would be required, say they ask you what is the unemployment rate, and you said, well, I'm going to start by just figuring out what sector of the population, what subsector is eligible for the workforce, and then how many people have a job, and then I can subtract that percent from 100. It seems to be fairly reasonable, right? That's how you get to the unemployment rate. But if you actually did that, you would end up with unemployment rate, I believe it's like 57 or 59% or something like that of the eligible workforce in America does not have a job. So to get to 6.5%, you have to start coming up with these convoluted, other calculations to strip out. You say, first of all, anyone that's been unemployed for over like a year, I'm going to take them out of the eligible workforce. Even though they want a job and they have to subsist on food stamps because they can't find a job, I'm going to strip them out. And you keep stripping it out, stripping it out, stripping it out till you get 6.5%. The same thing with that ludicrous inflation. If you took basically just a basket of goods and services on January 1st, the prices, and compared it on December 31st, you would get an inflation rate multiple times. I'm talking about hundreds of percents higher than what the lies the government and the bankers are telling you. Now, the reason they're telling you such huge lies, you can go back to Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels. He says, this lie, quote unquote, the lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. Now, you see some of the military consequences of the lie with all the warmongering going on with Russia and China now, because one of the military consequences is that bankers resort to is you take a country to war to distract them from all the economic misery. So that's one. And then the second is the economic consequences. I'm going to go into that in the next video, because if you believe these ludicrous lies that even Einhorn accepted, he quoted low inflation in his meeting with Bernanke, that Jim Rickards has said there's low inflation right now. If you accept these lies, you will make the absolute wrong investment decisions for you, the welfare of you, your friends, your family, your colleagues, or whoever else you're influencing by believing these incredulous lies. So that is the message for today. And until next time, as always, remain intensely curious. So long.